So in this segment, we're going to be discussing ministers seek deal with the EU to let British passport holders use the e-gate. So effectively, this is Rishi Sunak asking the EU to bail him out of all the travel chaos that we're seeing. But the issue is that it won't solve a lot of the issues that are visible in the UK. So Sunak wants to use the government's improved relationship with Brussels to make it easier for Britons to travel to Europe and avoid scenes of chaos at ports and airports. Among the ideas being looked at by the government is whether British travellers could be permitted to use e-gates that are reserved for EU passport holders and members of the European Economic Area. Spain has already agreed to change it at some airports, but any EU-wide policy would need to be agreed at Brussels. So as it stands, it's up to individual members how they deal with third countries. So individual member states. Some have deals on third country citizens using e-gates. Japan, the US, and Australia are three peoples who can use the e-gates within certain EU member states, but it depends on the country and the airport itself if it has the right tech for it, for example, because the biometric passports that other countries use are different. For example, when I went to Germany pre-2020, good times in Berlin, the American dude who was with us was in the same queue, was with us in the EU queue. Super cool dude he was. But he had to get his passport stamped. So he was in the same queue as us, but he had to make sure he went to the stamp guy. That was the only major difference. And how different airports deal with it is different as well. In Berlin, there was a guy who was kind of buzzing around the queue checking passports to make sure they were stamped properly before we went through the e-gate. But in Amsterdam airport, there's a dude at a desk by an exit just past the e-gates who check the passports. Even if you're from a third country that can use the e-gates, you still need to get passports stamped because some third countries have visa-free access to the EU, but it's only for a limited time. Like UK citizens can only stay 90 out of 180 days. Stamps are key to make sure people kind of adhere to that, and that's something the article seems to miss, and we'll discuss that. But the issue for me is that the stamps are the thing slowing everything down, and the government haven't got an answer for that. That's only at airports as well, certain airports. One government source told Bloomberg that the matter had been raised with the EU using the e-gate, but Downing Street said no discussions were underway. The Prime Minister's spokesman suggested that informal talks had begun taking place, saying, quote, "We are working closely with the European Commission and member states to understand the impacts of the introduction of the entry-exit system for British citizens, and our priority is always to minimise unnecessary delays for British passengers." End quote, he said. He added that some countries already allowed British citizens to use EU e-gates on arrival in certain circumstances, saying, quote, "Obviously it's in both our interests and the interests of the countries where British nationals are travelling as tourists," end quote. A formal approach has not been made yet, a UK official said, though diplomats are raising the issue informally. The bloc didn't respond to a request for comment. Sunak is due to meet European Commission President von der Leyen at the Group of Seven summit in Japan in May. But border crossings are a fundamental issue in the broader Brexit debate, making it politically awkward for both sides. Really, it's just for one side. The EU only allows citizens from the bloc and affiliated EEA nations to use its passport e-gates, and extending them to Britons would violate the principle that the post-Brexit UK shouldn't maintain the privileges of EU membership. The Prime Minister hopes to reach an agreement to let Britons use the e-gates for passport checks, the people said, on condition of anonymity, because the plans haven't been made public. That would speed up border crossings because manual checks, which include passport stamps, since the UK left the bloc, have contributed to frequent bottlenecks during busy periods. An EU source said there had been no official approach. Any deal might ease passport queues at airports, but would do little to speed up border checks at ports such as Dover and Folkestone, where travellers have endured long delays to board ferries and trains. This is where there are issues with the article cited. There's a Telegraph one and a Bloomberg one. Even if the UK got access to the e-gates, there's still the requirement of the manual stamp for the passports to be checked, which adds time to the queues. These can be a separate queue in themselves, depending on the airport setup, like we discussed earlier. Sunak's goal of getting an agreement EU-wide will probably not be feasible, as mentioned in the article that EU-wide access is only kept for EEA countries. The UK could try and get bilateral agreements with the different EU members, but that might be difficult. All this does is do favours for the UK. It will lower the queues slightly at the kinds of non-kind of e-gate queues that, the countries that we don't have agreements with currently. But the lack of access to e-gates is a reminder to British people that we are in the rest of the world category. That annoys some Brits, that they're stuck in the slow lane with the foreign people, that some people often see as lesser, especially the darker foreign people, whilst the EU citizens can run on through like they're Barry Allen or Shadow the Hedgehog, i.e. speeding past with the quickness, going through the e-gates and getting to the planes. This, after all, is a privilege, not a God-given right that some thought. And, I don't think even the text there at a lot of these airports to use the e-gates as mentioned as well, because it depends on the airport. French police based at Dover, the Eurotunnel in Folkestone and other ports will need to physically check and stamp passports to ensure compliance with post-Brexit limits on the number of British tourists are eligible to stay in EU countries and the continent. The e-gates won't resolve this issue at the ports, because at ports it's all manual checks. So that those annual queues we see at Easter that the government keeps claiming is down to bad weather conditions that hit just on that week are here to stay, and they could become worse depending on how the ETIAS system works, but we're yet to kind of know about that properly. There are fears these delays could be exacerbated by the new EU rules. Under the EU's new electric entry and exit system, car passengers may be required to leave their vehicles to undergo checks. This is likely to increase queues at peak times as well as causing congestion, particularly at Dover, which has space for vehicles. Having people exit vehicles will be, I think, incredibly unpopular, and I can't imagine it will go down well. But thanks to Brexit, we don't have a say in the subject at all. And will be subject to how the French want to deal with it. The EU set the rules but give flexibility to the member states to figure out how to implement the rules. So the French might require people to exit their vehicles to use a machine, or they might use tablets of some sort, or log people's biometrics and such. We don't know how the French are planning on doing this. We're still waiting on more news since the ETIAS scheme has been delayed, but this is where we move to bad takes. Like I said, the UK can't stop the ETIAS stuff, and I've seen bad takes and there's other stuff from entitled people, kind of talking about the situation and offering bogus solutions.
If we want free movement across the border, we need to agree a freedom of movement deal.
Should I really say, in this case, a freedom of movement deal with the EU? What the hell is that? I had to explain to this dude, right, the one mentioned, because he doesn't like saying my name, so I won't say his, but you can see who I'm talking about here, because I cited his video. I had to explain to that dude, you can't just rejoin the single market, where he was arguing that about the EU not wanting a Belarus on the Thames, etc. I put it out, it'd require a change to the EEA agreement, which I already explained to him how hard it would be. You need a change not just from EU member states, but also from EFTA states. And now he's claiming we can just get a deal on freedom of movement. Like, we can be realistic about the situation we're in now. It just makes me sad that we have... It just makes me sad. The situation makes me sad, and now we have to see a picture of Sad Goku, because this picture, it sums up how I feel. It really does. This idea that we could rejoin the single market, debunk that one. Now this new idea we can get a freedom of movement deal. Like, bro, did you not remember what I said about changing the EEA agreement? And the fact is, we're not even the A side or the B side anymore. We're the C side. A party that the other two will deal with on their own terms and in their own time. We have been through this with May. We got who got humiliated by Jean-Claude Juncker and the EU over cherry picking. You can't just pick the parts of the single market you like. Just like you can't rejoin the single market. People follow around some of these arguments like some sort of Bon Christo, like, the guy's not cooking anything. You see some of the takes he comes out with, and you're just like, wow. And that goes for a lot of the rejoin community who are incredibly entitled. This person saying, as a Remain voter who would certainly vote to rejoin on our prior terms, the really good terms we had, but not if it meant joining the Euro and committing to ever closer union. I am torn. I think Brexit vote proved refs don't work unless they are yay or nay on the very specific plan. But the thing is, referendums do work. We see it in Switzerland, we see it in Ireland, we see it in other EU member states, other European states. The problem is the way we ran it is like morons, and we just allowed liars to get away with brazen lies. That was the problem we had. So it's not referendums don't work, it's the fact that we don't actually know how to hold a referendum. You got this guy, Edwin Hayward, who said, about Labour, saying pro-Brexit and explicitly against rejoining the single market, customs union or EU. Starmer's trying very hard not to get elected, isn't he? And, I saw someone else claim they won't vote Labour because they won't push to rejoin the single market. When you make nonsense claims about the single market, you're making it harder for Labour to win. Labour are relying on some very pro-EU people to vote Labour instead of for the Lib Dems. So you're hurting your own cause. I checked the source he listed in his video, and I'll link his video below. And then, there was no mention of freedom of movement. None at all. And, he posed it as a question, is Sunak asking for freedom of movement? But we know he's not. It wasn't even cited in the article. So even when these people put sources, it's not, the source don't even back up what they say. And this is what happens when this what will happen is when you ask people why won't they vote Labour, these kind of incredibly pro-EU people, they'll say, why don't you get a deal on freedom of movement? Why don't you get a deal on joining the single market, etc.? When we know that can't happen. But because you make nonsensical statements, you make yourself look stupid. You make the Labour Party weaker, because these people will say, well, I'm not going to vote Labour because they won't rejoin the single market. When we know we can't do that, it's not easy. You have to get a whole change to the EEA. You might as well just try and rejoin the EU proper, put your application in, and adhere to the Copenhagen criteria as best you can. That's what needs to happen here. But, these people are so entitled. They genuinely believe Britannia rules the waves and we're some sort of big dog, and, the EU fears our decline because we'll become like a Belarus. The EU already deals with Turkey and Russia. They don't fear us. And when you make these sorts of arguments, when you make the arguments about us joining the single market or getting a free movement of deal, you make yourself look stupid, because it's so easy to burn down your arguments. And I'll do that with ease, like I use Blazing Gigs or Diablo Jambo. It's just 2EZ. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. And hopefully I'll see you in the next one. And I'm just getting bored of these people who act like they know what they're doing, like they're some sort of bon Christo, like they know what they're cooking. But bro's not cooking anything. Let's be honest now. I'll catch you in the next one.